Alright, we're going to be reviewing the PTS Week 2 and 3 patch notes for Update 41, otherwise known as the Scions of Ithelia DLC. And there's going to be some things I want to explain here, given the more overarching context given to us in the Week 2 PTS patch notes. Now, it was a very surprising patch note as far as the nerf to Barb Trap went. So, for those of you who haven't caught up yet, the nerf to Barb Trap says, this morph now increases the damage done of the initial hit by 20%, and the initial hit now always applies the Hemorrhaging status effect, rather than increasing the chances of applying the effect by 10 times. Now on paper, initially, it might seem like a buff because they're buffing the initial hit of a dot by 20%. However, they are taking away that initial hit's application of the Hemorrhaging status effect, which is a big thing in terms of damage. In terms of DPS, Trap Beast, or rather Barb Trap, is one of the strongest damage over time effects, single target wise, available for a lot of PvE DPS classes across the board. We're talking about Wardens, we're talking about Nightblades, we're talking about Templars, everybody, even Arcanists. And the Week 2 changes to Barb Trap basically took away, depending on your uptime and depending on the fight, of Barb Trap, about at least 3 to 5,000-ish DPS from everybody. And this is a big deal because your source of hemorrhaging often comes from Barb Trap, especially as a non-Warden DPS. And they didn't really, just like for the changes with Arcanist and arguably a couple changes for, the main change for Necromancer, they didn't really give any other options. They're kind of saying here in Week 2, hey, we want you to try to maybe get hemorrhaging through other sources, but we're not going to give you those sources. We want to encourage you to do things with different playstyles or maybe try out different rotations on some classes, but we're not going to give you the options. We're not going to give you the incentives. So it's kind of weird, right? And the developer comment for this Week 2 nerf says, since we've significantly buffed hemorrhaging in instances when you can keep up the effect, we're toning down this morph's ability to passively keep it active. Now the initial hit will help jumpstart your stacks, but you'll need to find additional sources of bleed damage to keep up the pressure. So again, on paper, this makes sense because they are buffing the damage of hemorrhaging for next patch. But they're also taking away access to it. So yeah, that was a really surprising thing in Week 2. Two things I want to mention for Week 2, or just one thing really. That Flaming Oil, I did cover this in a previous video on the PTS, that for some reason Flaming Oil was not stacking like the other siege weaponry was, as they're meant to. Turns out that's a bug, and now they will stack, confirmed. And of course there was a bug apparently with Sorcerer, but it's been fixed. So we're going to move on to the Week 3 PTS patch notes. Now just keep that hemorrhaging / Barb Trap change in mind. Just a heads up as well that they are testing the Jester's Festival, which is to occur in March, and the Anniversary Jubilee in April. And that the double XP bonus will be passive. You don't have to eat the cake or whatever to get that double XP bonus. But that's really it. So combat ability changes. Hemorrhaging, they adjusted the status effects damage to be less penalizing while not at full stacks. What does this mean? This will result in an 89% increase in damage at 1 stack, 20% more damage at 2 stacks, and the same damage at 3 stacks. Overall, this means this status effect, hemorrhaging, will now be 25% weaker than burning at base, than the burning status effect, and the same damage as burning at 2 stacks, and 25% more stronger than burning while at 3 stacks. So they're using burning as a metric here, because burning, along with poisoned status effects, have been kings of damage for a long time now, and they want to ratchet up the other status effects like hemorrhaging or disease to that level. Whether they succeed or not is again debatable. So far, based on testing, it doesn't seem like it's all even or meant to be. So we'll see once they finalize things for Update 41 by Week 5 PTS. So this means that the hemorrhaging status effect will now be weaker, 24% weaker at first stack, the same at 2 stacks, and 25% strongbow at 3 stacks. They also increased the sources of the stats effect for non-warden builds to obtain the effect. So this is kind of what I was worried about when week 2 happened, and I was like, okay, so how else are we going to get hemorrhaging apart from weapon skills and so forth like that? Will there be more access? So we'll see. They also gave a slight buff, actually, to the Blighted Blastbones morph. So for those of you who haven't caught up yet, again, the Necromancer Blastbones has been changed. The base skill in the Magicka morph, which basically almost every Necromancer used, at least as far as PvE goes, has been completely changed. It's not a Blastbones rushing to your enemy, it's coming to you, and you get a 20% dot buff plus 20% damage buff to your Gravelord abilities. And it's not too bad. Again, like, I think Necromancer, if you want to fully like parse on it, it can still hit a bit north of 120k DPS. But again, there's some controversy here because you're taking away the option away from a lot of people who prefer the Magicka morph because of the resource cost or sustain cost, and just kind of giving them the stamina morph of the original Blastbones only, and that's what they're doing here. But it looks like they are buffing Blighted Blastbones, the stamina morph of the original Blastbones, and now that always applies the disease stats effect on hit. Now this is actually, in my opinion, a bit significant because the disease stats effect, if you read the patch notes, has also been changed, has also been buffed. So I think there will be a slight DPS increase on Blighted Blastbones. As for whether people will actually use it or not is, again, a different story. So we'll see, considering Blastbones is, or has always kind of been a huge portion of your damage done in PvE instances. So we'll see. But yeah, something to keep an eye on here for sure. For the Templar, very unexpected buff in my opinion. It's not much, but it's not nothing. It's kind of like, but also, oh, okay, so Power the Light morph. This morph now always applies the Sundered stats effect when it deals damage, both the initial tick and the explosion tick at the end of the duration, rather than applying a unique 10-second form of Minor Breach, as Sundered will cover, as a stats effect, Minor Breach for a duration between. Note this does not mean Minor Breach can fall off for a very short period of time. This does mean, rather, it can fall off a very short period of time if this is your only source of triggering the effect. So let me explain this and how this is a buff. Power to Light will now always apply the Sunder stats effect on the initial tick and explosion. So technically you are getting, due to passives and so forth, from things like Templar passives like, oh god, I can't, it's a Dawn's Wrath passive. There's also a couple multipliers in the background running on the damage cost, or sorry, damage calculations here. So you could probably get about 80 to 100 weapon and spell damage while Powered Light is up on your target. And since they are buffing Sundered, the stats effect, as they are with Diseased, and Overcharge and stuff like that. So this might be a slight DPS gain. Probably, again, depending on your uptime, maybe anywhere between 1500 to 3500 DPS, maybe around there, somewhere around there. And again, just because of how damage calculations are done, at least as far as this will go, it might actually be surprisingly a slight DPS buff. I was not expecting anything for Templar, considering that there was nothing for Templar in the first week of PTS. So again, it's not nothing, it's not a lot, but it might be a bit more than what you expect, just like it might be more than what you expect with Blighted Blastbones. So we'll see. Now, we also have a change to focused aim morph for bow. This morph now always applies the Sundered stats effect rather than unique form of Minor Breach for 10 seconds. I think that will also be a slight DPS gain or damage gain, depending on whether you're going for PvE or PvP. We also have a change to the Lacerate ultimate for dual wield skill line. This ultimate and its morphs will now always apply the Hemorrhaging stats effect each tick. This is really nice, in my opinion, especially for instances of PvP, and maybe potentially, depending if they want to change the Lacerate morphs a bit more appropriately for PvE, it might actually be really good. So we'll see. Two-handed, reverse slash, executioner morph. This morph now deals bleed damage rather than physical damage. This was done to help additional sources of the damage type enter the game to help balance out ways to apply status effects. So again, Executioner will now deal bleed damage rather than physical damage. And it's kind of all centered around the whole hemorrhaging status effect thing. And I can see this being a good direction, particularly if we want to look at 200 on the back bar again, or even 200 on the front bar again, depending on your class. So something to definitely consider, whether it's for trash fights or AoE-based boss fights. Maybe it'll make a comeback, maybe it won't, we'll see. Depends on testing. I have seen some testing done for the next one here, the Vampire skill line of the spammable Eviscerate, and the Morphs will now also apply the Hemorrhaging status effect. I think it's definitely, again, a good step in terms of direction of kind of giving out a bit more access to the Hemorrhaging status effect, especially for skill lines, or in this case, Vampire, where it's kind of like Vampire has had a really rough journey. When they revamped it in 2020, they kind of made it where maybe at least 3 or 4 skills even were used in both PvE and PvP. But since then, it's kind of returned back to why it was revamped in the first place. It's just kind of returned to, you just kind of use it for niche situations or scenarios, like maybe Mistform, or maybe just ulti drain as a tank, or maybe even just have the undeath passive, and that's it really for PvP. And we've just kind of come full circle. So it's nice to see that they are adding a bit more to Vampire in terms of its spammable, granting a guaranteed application of the Hemorrhaging status effect. So that's nice to see. In terms of numbers, I don't know if this will I don't think it will actually out DPS things like Rapid Strikes. Maybe it might be slightly behind, so maybe it doesn't really matter ultimately to a lot of people. But again, just nice to see, I guess, some access to Hemorrhaging outside of Warden and a couple skills here and there. Interestingly, they've also done the same thing for Werewolf. This ability ends Morph's initial hit will now always apply the Hemorrhaging status effect. I have a lot to say about... Again, it's the same as Vampire, right? Nice, cool, they get Hemorrhaging, but is this really enough to bring Werewolf back as a serious contender in terms of either PvE or even PvP? Probably not. I guess it's nice that they did it, but Werewolf is kind of in the gutter. So yeah, I don't know. And of course, this doesn't... A lot of these don't really think about the potential ripple effects for other classes like Nightblade. I think Nightblade will probably kind of lean a bit more, for example, on Eviscerate and its morphs, because maybe it might out DPS a new concealed weapon. But on the other hand, there will be some classes that will never even see some of these in use, like for example Arcanist with its beam. So I don't know. It's interesting to see that they are doing a lot of things with the status effects here and introducing a bit more access to Hemorrhaging. I'm just not feeling if it's going to be so impactful to the point everyone's going to start running Werewolf or Vampire again. We'll see. Cruel Flurry, there was an issue where the set could occasionally enhance channeled abilities. Okay. So this Cruel Flurry is referring to the VMA dual wield set, which hasn't been used, God, seriously, since at the latest 2019. So I'm hoping that they give more love to not just VMA dual wield set, but also every other set, out there. But again, that's a different conversation to be had. And that's really it. Let me know down in the comments below if you want me to answer any questions or clear up any confusion in regards to what the PTS weeks 2 and 3 mean. Don't expect anything again much for week 4. There wasn't much for week 2. There might be a surprise, but based on the past, week 4 doesn't really have much. Week 5 might have some things, but that also tends to be a surprise as well. So usually week 1 and week 3 are the most significant or the most heavy weeks of changes for the public test server before the update goes live after the 6th week of PTS. And that's it. See you guys soon.